The other element to markets is, and with the pre-revenue biotechs being sort of undervalued compared to historical levels, is that it makes them really interesting to strategics who want to enter into the space. Radiopharmaceuticals is a bit of a niche area, or it has historically been a bit niche because you've got this element of a diagnostic and a theranostic. Not everyone wants to be in diagnostics. And then also it's just the logistics and supply side of radiopharmaceuticals is a new kind of concept to most big pharma players. So, just maybe your sort of high-level thoughts on how you're seeing the strategic interest into the space. It was very hot a couple of years ago. It's somewhat died off, but I kind of think it's growing a little bit again. I see kind of the activity in the US around some of the new IPOs and kind of the plethora actually of radiopharmaceutical companies. But yeah, just what your thoughts are and sort of who the key players and who are now and maybe in the future.
Yeah, that was a fascinating time. I can't believe what happened during that period of time, and but it was great to see, and it was great to see all these companies trying to get a position.
Mm.
Now we move on, a couple of years from that, and the big ones, like Novartis, is the market leader. They generate the most revenues from their products in radiopharmaceuticals, and that is off the back of Pluvicto,
Yep.
a beta emitter of all things. And they have a small diagnostic program that they've decided to keep.
Yep.
Which is an interesting strategy because there is so much money to be made in diagnostics.
Yep.
Interestingly enough. And there's a couple of groups which are interested in the diagnostic space itself, but therapy, there needs to be a therapy component to it.
Mm.
But the strategies have been fascinating. BMS's strategy. So to make a $4 billion plus
Yep.
transaction on Dotatate for the second time, like Dotatate was sold twice, once for the beta, once for the alpha.
Yep.
And to implement that strategy, it'd be fascinating to how that plays out. There's offsite targeting with that asset, we know,
Yep.
but they desperately wanted to get into the space. BMS are one of the smaller big pharmas,
Yep.
and they will need to do something. And we'll see how that plays out. Eli Lilly was one that stepped in. They're on the other scale, end of the scale of big pharma. They bought points assets. There's not much there anymore. We knew that trial was going to be less good as Pluvicto because they were dosing less.
Mm-hmm.
We spoke about earlier, what's the mechanism of action? That area under the curve, you reduce the area under the curve, you're going to reduce the efficacy. It was an interesting strategy, but they took the view it was a unpatented product.
Mm.
Even though there is a patent fight over that with Novartis and the like. So it was an interesting strategy, but Eli Lilly spent not an insignificant amount of money, and they don't have anything to show for it. But they are a big company; they're going to do very well. There's such a massive organization in other areas, but they need to make investment.
Yep.
And they need to come up and looking at some of the transactions, like Bayer is coming back.
Yep.
Lovely to see them. They're in diagnostics and therapies.
Mm-hmm.
They have the Trillium asset that we spoke about earlier, which the efficacy looks okay.
Yep.
They're using an alpha strategy. So they're an interesting player. They're the first to move. A number of our team were with them after the Argida acquisition.
Yep.
And it'll be interesting to see how they play and whether they're given that freedom now after the Monsanto issues that they've had to deal with and had a lot to chew on that. But it'll be interesting to see how they play moving forward. J&J have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
They've tried.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't worked out so well. They've got a target that they fell in love with, and hopefully that pans out for them. But they need a bigger strategy than single assets. And there's some now that have, we've got these patent cliffs coming on and no exposure. And so it'll be interesting to see how some of those others play out. AstraZeneca hit pretty hard with Fusion.
Yep.
They were using, once again, an unpatented molecule. Be interesting to see how that, competes, or the data, when the data comes out, how it competes with the Trillium asset, for instance, where I know John Babbage, did a fair bit of work on and expecting it to be a better asset. So those things will play out. What do I think is the future for a big pharma? There needs to be a beta and alpha strategy.
Yep.
That is critical. I would suggest there needs to be a diagnostic strategy. If you have those 3 areas, you become a complete radiopharmaceutical offering.
Mhm.
The only group that has that really at the moment is Novartis. When we look at that, they're trying to develop alphas in the PSMA space, for instance. They have the number 1 beta in the space, and they have a very small diagnostic component, but can build upon that, certainly through acquisition if they needed. And that's it. That's the only one that's taken that approach to date. As I said, Bayer do have diagnostics and they do have therapies, so they're the one that can really follow on from that. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
Do you think that all of them are receptive to radiopharmaceuticals, just considering it's a different conversation around supply and logistics?
Not all of them. Some are just, focused on their areas, which they should be.
Yep.
Radiopharm is very oncology focused. And if you don't have a big play in oncology, then why be in it?
Mhm.
But it's interesting, even Novartis's approach, which didn't have any assets really in prostate.
Yeah.
But then you see the big players in prostate, the J&Js and the Pfizers.
Pfizer, yeah.
And Pfizer are asleep at the wheel when it comes to radiopharm, even though they've brought in the new Novartis. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And we mentioned J&J. J&J are a massive player in the prostate space. They've tried with an asset and haven't succeeded. It'd be interesting to see how they play now moving forward. I think it's a very important modality for these players in oncology or prostate. They need those assets, particularly when they've got all the other capabilities within that space. But look, we're excited. Look, if I discuss us, my goal at Clarity was to build a company from scratch on the back of provisional patents and become the number 1 player in that space. Very, very few Australian companies have even done what we've done so far today. Right? Complete the recruitment of phase 3 clinical trial for asset. There has been some with Australian assets. I'm only talking about Australian assets.
Yep.
There's been a few that obviously have done well, like Neuron, our friends at Neuron, and Mesoblast. Like they've got products to market, but they're not Australian derived. There's very few that have done it. I don't fly the flag too much as a patriot, but I'm very, very proud Aussie, particularly in the science space, and I'm very keen to see that through.
Yep.
Whatever happens, though, we are constantly monitoring the market. We're constantly in communication with strategics and the like, but there is a lot of money to make out of diagnostics in the first instance. I don't think I'll ever see an opportunity like this where we are so far better than standard of care. And you know how we know that? The response of our competitors.
Yep.
We are so far ahead that we're looking to take a very large percentage of a massive market. And that's a thrill for all of our team to do that. But we are in a dynamic, acquisitive area as pharma and biotech. It's going to intensify because of patent cliffs and issues. Does a big pharma want even one asset that produces billions of dollars? People are making acquisitions on hundreds of millions of dollars of peak revenue. What about billions of dollars in high margin on a diagnostic strategy?
Yep.
Let alone the therapy strategy, let alone the opportunity to use their own targets and moieties and the like with a platform opportunity. So some things are taken out of my personal hands and will be with our shareholders as a whole. I am a shareholder as well, as you know. And we come together to see what's in the best interest of the company and of all our shareholders. But if you don't have this fight, if you don't have this drive and this excitement, it's a tough job to have. And I love it every day.
And just thinking about the kind of how you structure those, we've seen a lot more, we've seen an increase in sort of licensing rather than sort of whole company acquisitions. So a lot of licensing deals. Are all of those up for grabs, just in broad terms for clarity?
So the key groups that we think about opportunities to, let's use the term collaborate, are the ones that we're looking to take their market. And I say, and I have these reach outs from our competitors, as you know, and in sometimes very weird and bizarre ways. What is the offering of those companies relative to us? They typically have a sales force. Yes, well done. Tick the box. What we have found in salespeople, they're wonderful people that want to make lots of money in a very short amount of time.
Yep.
How do you do that? With the next product coming on. We don't have any problems attracting those sorts of people. We've actually increased our commercial group. We've got the former Novartis commercial team who launched Pluvicto, which is great. Both of them. So Bryce Cantor's been with us for some time.
Yep.
And Chris Horvath's just recently come on board, even though we've known him for the last few years. He went to other company like Point, where it was closer to market, and he was part of that Point. He was part of Point when it was acquired. Our key focus with those ones that might want to play a little bit, they're not much bigger than us.
Yep.
They can't do much anymore. They've been somewhat, crippled by the markets and the market and the market's view of their assets.
Yep.
And we think we can do a lot better ourselves.
Yep.
When it becomes larger companies, there are larger companies which are in the diagnostic space. It'd be interesting to see how that evolves, because they are looking at becoming larger radiopharm groups.
Yep.
In what I would call the mid pharma as opposed to big pharma, but the big pharma is so big now, and licensing like BIS PSMA. Does that make sense? I wouldn't think so. We don't have problems raising capital. We don't have problems with building our team. We don't have problems, in any part of that clinical plan that we've had to date. You never know what's going to happen in commercialization, but we're feeling very good about that. We've got the right team and increasing the size of our team, obviously, and we want to build a sales force at the right time. We feel really good about where we are right now in that. But you never know. And the dynamics are still hot, and things are moving along. We'll see how that plays out. Either way, we're set.
Yep.
We're in a strong position as a standalone company with multiple assets, and really the key being, to market the next small amount of time.
Yep.
But if it so happens that it makes more sense from a shareholder perspective to move into, hands with a lot more funding, a lot bigger in context, then we have to make those decisions.
And just because I know it comes up a lot, and I noticed that when all of that radiopharma sort of M&A activity happened, it had people pointed to the fact that they'd had sort of the supply and logistics side, kind of set up. Do you think that that's important to have that really well established so it doesn't scare any of the pharma players off? And, maybe just touching on what you're doing in the next little bit of time on the copper 64 and 67 side.
Yeah, it's interesting. We know from the BMS experiment that not everything was in place, which was fascinating. It's a halter clinical trial a couple of months after the acquisition. I wonder who lost their job over that.
Yep.
So what people say they have and what they do have are probably two different things. Setting up a warehouse with a radiation sticker out the front is not a radiopharm facility.
Yep.
Ours is a little bit different, our model. Copper 64 supply, it's understood. There's already cyclotrons making copper 64 in the US, commercial cyclotron facilities making copper 64 in the US and making our products. Copper 67, we're the leader in the space in copper 67.
Yep.
Have a couple of organizations using different technologies.
Yep.
One built it from the ground up, Linac, John Stoner, who we love dearly out of Idaho, and still making a copper 67 today. And phenomenal grade copper 67 off the back of Linacs, which costs next to nothing to make.
Yep.
So a facility isn't actually that expensive to make copper 67. We had North Star invest in rototrons and that capability as well. When it was, producing copper 67, it's really good for our clinical trials, and great group to work with. And there's some others now, like Nisano, looking to make copper 67 as well. And that's terrific moving into the phase 3 clinical trials. Will we, when people are looking at these models, will we invest in infrastructure and capability ourselves? The answer is definitely maybe. So we do like some of the technology around copper 67 and the like. So we'll see.
It's a pretty unique isotope that's not been sort of done before.
And it gives us the opportunity for that complete vertical integration, which who has that? Novartis are relying on aging nuclear reactors and third-party suppliers. we won't have to rely on any of that as a company. So from a security of supply perspective, that's fantastic. On the diagnostic side, there's no reason for us to make copper-64. There's so many, groups that can manufacture and make our product there. So those are in place, and as I said, we look to build out that capability further, so we're ready to go on launch in what we expect to be a large market from day one. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Final question: are you bullish on biotechs in the next 12 months?
General biotechs?
Yeah, just
Biotech
general.
space.
Yep.
Do you know, I hope there's a number of biotechs in Australia that I hope thrive.
Yep.
We're starting to really show, and I'm proud that Clarity was part of this, to the markets that we have a viable biotech sector here in Australia.
Yep.
The reason why, I shifted into this and to do this was that when I was in investment banking, smallest deals we did were 10 million up to 100 million, which wiped out the entire Australian market.
Yep.
Nowadays, we're seeing more of those in excess of that amount, including ourselves. So seeing groups do really well, PYC with a big transaction recently, and some others, Neuron, I mentioned before, I love the team there. The Mesoblast team now are doing some great work. Now, talk about resilience.
Yep.
Silvio and the team have been there for a long time building that company, and so proud of them. And so it's terrific to see those companies survive and thrive.
Yep.
There's some smaller ones now. I love cancer therapeutics that are struggling just on the capital side, and they have to fight the capital markets and some other things to get through. I hope they do really well.
Yep.
They're very, very small market caps at the moment, trying to run therapy programs. It's a difficult model, and I know some great people who are heading up those organizations. I hope they do really well.
Mhm.
When capital is the issue, I get anxiety about it because it means that the products might be fantastic, but it's the flow of capital.
Yep.
With us, we've never had to have any significant issues around capital. For my misspent youth as an investment banker, paid off for something, and as a company, we've been able to capital raise all the way through. And I hope some of those companies are able to access some good capital so they can actually complete some great initial efficacy trials to see if those products are viable.
Completely agree.